time, and it took me about 10 years on and off to write this book because it was kind of emotional for me, because I knew how hard my parents worked to make sure that we got ahead and got an education. But at the time, about 10 years ago or more, they were saying that black families, it was a stereotype, don't care about their children's education. I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't true about my family. It wasn't true about a lot of families who lived in Mill Creek. I'm doing research right now, volunteering with Gwen Moore at the History Museum, the Library Research Center. We work in the library part because basically we're researchers and librarians. And I have so far, we're developing a list. One of my assignments is to develop a list of notables. And it's quite amazing, as Gwen has talked about and Vivian has alluded to, of all the great achievers who came out of Mill Creek. Elston Howard, who wrote the Color Bar for the New York Yankees, lived in Mill Creek. He graduated from Vashon. I'm doing the notables who graduated from Vashon. Percy Green, an activist who's still with us, went to Vashon. My brother and sister went to Vashon, and then they went on to, my sister first went to Lincoln, and then she came here to St. Louis University. My brother first went to Harris Stowe, and then he went to KU, and then he came back here to St. Louis University to go to law school. And one of the things when I was writing this book, since they talk about, what did they used to call it? The achievement gap. Yeah, the achievement gap. You don't hear much about it anymore, but one time it was all the rage. When my older brother and sister went from a segregated school to a more desegregated school, they did just as well or better. We had great teachers in our segregated schools in Mill Creek. We went to Johnson, Gwen and I went to Johnson, Vivian went to Lincoln. Johnson was named after James Weldon Johnson and James Rosamond Johnson, who wrote the Negro National Anthem, which is called Lift Every Voice and Sing. Some of the other notables, Modi Taylor, who got a PhD in chemistry. This is nothing to brag about, but he worked with the Manhattan Institute, and then he became a diplomat. Those are the kinds of people, and I could go on and on and on. So one of the things I would like to particularly say is that stereotyping is at the heart of institutionalized racism. Stereotyping is at the core of institutionalized racism. That's baseline. So if you want to harm or change or destroy something, first you start the stereotyping, the silent campaign, and then it gets louder and louder and louder. If the people are not very powerful to push against it, even though that did happen with some of the civil rights groups that came here from all over the country, who met at the People's Finance Building. A lot of this I got from Gwen, so she's a consummate historian. But they just didn't have the political heft to push up against getting rid of, destroying our communities. Because as children, we were children when we left, we were kind of devastated, as most children are when they have to move. And someone already talked about how it was leveled. It was called Hiroshima Flats. Some of the historians called it that because it laid fallow for so long. So they destroyed it, but then they didn't do anything with it for years, for decades. And so when we moved, we ended up in the Post-Dispatch because our parents owned their home. Only 10%, Vivian said, I didn't know that families owned their own home. But we were holding out for more money because they didn't want to give us hardly anything. And my parents had 6 kids. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom, as they called, a housewife. And so my father was a teamster, so they didn't have a lot of money. And so they were holding out, and finally they put us in the Post-Dispatch, but then they kind of stereotyped us and made us look like we were doing something that we weren't really doing. So there are lots of reasons why I wrote that book. The first half is about being in Mill Creek, and then the second half is moving to the north side when it was predominantly white, and there was a growing number of middle-class professional black people who had moved there. And there were cultural shocks, because in Mill Creek there was a culture that was different, as been described. When we moved to the north side with predominantly whites, it was a different culture. So I had a hard time adjusting. Had a hard time adjusting in school, because if you remember, the segregated schools, we had teachers who taught differently. And then we had to go to another type school, and I struggled. One last thing. My mother went to Vashon High School. She had PhDs as professors. So maybe that's why they did so much better. Good for the students, but not so good for them, because they couldn't find jobs any other place. So they ended up teaching in high school. And I think Prince, who is from Brooklyn, Illinois, the oldest black town in the country, is noted, said they had PhDs in elementary school. So that gives you, I think, an idea of the kind of situation we were in. Some of us landed on our feet, although we all could have done better. Others fell through the cracks. It was a diaspora. So we spread out, and it really weakened the community.